What if the biggest difference between the rich and everyone else isn't how much money they make, but the quiet habits they practice when nobody is watching? Not the flashy cars, not the luxury vacations, not the designer clothes. Those are just the visible signals. The real difference lives in the invisible behaviors, the silent decisions, the small psychological patterns that shape how money flows through their lives. And here's the strange part. Most of these habits don't look like wealth. In fact, many of them look boring. But once you understand them, you'll start noticing something fascinating. The upper class often behaves in ways that the middle class would find uncomfortable. And the middle class often behaves in ways that silently destroy wealth. Today, we're breaking down the silent habits of the upper class, the behaviors they rarely talk about, and the psychological traps that keep everyone else stuck. But before we begin, here's a question. If you enjoy learning about the psychology of money and the hidden forces shaping financial success, take a second to like the video. Because the more people understand these patterns, the less power those invisible traps have. Now let's start with a simple scenario. Imagine two people. Both earn $100,000 a year. Same salary. Same city. Same cost of living. Yet 10 years later, one of them has built serious wealth. The other is still living paycheck to paycheck. How does that happen? Most people assume it's about income. But behavioral finance research shows something very different. According to studies from the National Bureau of Economic Research, financial outcomes are often driven less by income and more by behavior. In other words, your financial life is shaped more by your habits than your salary. And the upper class understands this at a deep psychological level. Let's start with the first silent habit. Silent habit number 1, they separate status from wealth. One of the most powerful psychological traps in modern society is something called status signaling. It's the urge to display success. The nice car, the expensive watch, the luxury apartment. These purchases don't just provide comfort. They send signals. Signals that say, I'm successful. I've made it. I belong at a higher level. But here, the hidden problem. Status signaling is incredibly expensive. And it creates something behavioral economists call lifestyle inflation. This happens when income rises and spending rises even faster. A promotion leads to a nicer apartment. The nicer apartment leads to higher bills. Higher bills create pressure to maintain the lifestyle. Suddenly, the person earning six figures feels financially trapped. And this isn't rare. A 2023 survey from Lending Club found that nearly 48% of Americans earning over $100,000 still live paycheck to paycheck. Let that sink in. Almost half of six-figure earners are financially stressed. Not because they don't earn enough, but because their lifestyle expanded to match their income. Now here, where the upper class behaves differently. They separate status from wealth. To most people, those two things feel identical. But psychologically, they are opposites. Status is about being seen as successful. Wealth is about having freedom. Status requires spending. Wealth requires restraint. And this creates a strange paradox. The people most focused on appearing rich often destroy their ability to become rich, while the people quietly building wealth often look ordinary from the outside. You see this pattern in countless real-world stories. There are millionaires who drive 10-year-old cars. There are executives who live in modest homes despite massive incomes. Not because they can't afford more, but because they understand something powerful. Every dollar used to impress others is a dollar that can no longer build freedom. But there's an even deeper psychological layer here. And this is where things get interesting. Humans evolved in small tribes where social status meant survival. Being admired meant protection, resources, and influence. So today, even in modern society, our brains still chase status signals. Luxury goods trigger dopamine. Social approval triggers validation. And companies know this. Entire industries are built around selling the illusion of success. But the upper class quietly breaks this cycle. They buy luxury when it serves them, not when it serves other people's opinions. And this brings us to the second silent habit. one that completely changes how money grows over time. Silent habit number 2, they think in decades, not paychecks. Most financial decisions happen in the short term. Monthly bills, weekly spending, impulse purchases. The brain is wired for instant gratification. Psychologists call this present bias. We naturally value rewards today far more than rewards in the future. A $200 dinner tonight feels exciting. Saving that same $200 for retirement feels invisible. But here, where the upper class rewires their thinking. They operate on longer time horizons. Not weeks, not months, decades. This mindset creates a massive advantage. Because of something called compound growth. Compounding is often described as the most powerful force in finance. But psychologically, it's extremely difficult to appreciate. Why? Because its effects are invisible in the beginning. Let's say someone invests $500 a month into an index fund averaging 8% returns. After 5 years, they have about $36,000. Nice but not life-changing. At 10 years, around $91,000. Still moderate. But then something fascinating happens. In 20 years, that investment becomes about $295,000. At 30 years, it grows to over $745,000. The curve accelerates. Slow, then fast, then explosive. But here's the problem. Most people quit before the curve takes off. Because the early stages feel slow and unrewarding. This is where psychology becomes dangerous. When people don't see quick results, they assume the strategy isn't working. They stop investing. They chase new opportunities. They jump between financial trends. But the upper class quietly does the opposite. They stay consistent. Not because it's exciting, but because they understand something simple. Wealth rarely arrives suddenly. It accumulates quietly over long periods of disciplined behavior. And here's the fascinating part. From the outside, these habits look unimpressive. Automatic investments, controlled spending, long-term patience, no dramatic moves. But over time, these boring behaviors create extraordinary results. Yet there's another silent habit that might be even more powerful. Because it explains why some people build wealth even when they start with less. And why others lose wealth even when they start with more. It's a psychological force called loss aversion. And once you understand it, you'll start seeing financial decisions in a completely different way. We'll break that down next. But first, I want to hear your perspective. Have you ever noticed how some high earners still struggle financially, while others quietly build wealth? Drop a comment below with your observation. Because understanding these patterns is the first step toward escaping them. Now let's talk about the hidden psychology that shapes how the upper class protects their wealth. And why most people unknowingly do the opposite. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful and most misunderstood psychological forces in finance. A force that quietly shapes almost every financial decision people make. It's called loss aversion. And according to behavioral economists, it may be one of the biggest reasons people struggle to build wealth. Loss aversion means that the pain of losing money feels about twice as strong as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. In simple terms, losing $1,000 hurts far more than gaining $1,000 feels good. This creates a strange pattern in human behavior. People become extremely emotional when money feels threatened. They panic when markets drop. They avoid investments because they fear losses. They hold on to bad financial decisions because admitting a loss feels painful. But the upper class quietly trains themselves to think differently. They don't eliminate the fear of loss. They manage it strategically. Let's look at a real-world example. During the 2008 financial crisis, global markets collapsed. The S&P 500 fell by about 57% from peak to bottom. Millions of people panicked. Investors sold their stocks. Retirement accounts were emptied. People moved their money into cash because the fear felt unbearable. But hear what history shows. Those who stayed invested or even continued buying saw enormous gains in the following decade. From 2009 to 2020, the S&P 500 grew more than 400%. In other words, the biggest financial opportunity came immediately after the moment of maximum fear. But most people missed it. Why? Because loss aversion hijacked their decisions. The upper class often behaves differently during these moments. Instead of reacting emotionally to market volatility, they view downturns as temporary price distortions. When assets become cheaper, they accumulate more. It's the opposite of what instinct tells us to do. Most people buy when prices are high because optimism feels safe. And they sell when prices are low because fear feels overwhelming. The upper class flips this behavior. They buy when others are fearful. And they remain calm when markets become chaotic. This doesn't mean they are fearless. It means they operate from a different psychological framework. They see volatility as part of the system, not a threat to the system. But this leads to another silent habit that rarely gets discussed. And once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Silent habit number 3, they avoid the wealth illusion. One of the most dangerous financial traps in modern society is something called the wealth illusion. The wealth illusion happens when someone looks financially successful, but their underlying financial position is fragile. This illusion is incredibly common. You see it in luxury cars parked outside apartments. You see it in designer clothes purchased with credit cards. You see it in social media lifestyles funded by debt. The problem is that modern financial systems make it very easy to simulate wealth. Credit cards, car loans, buy now pay later services. These tools allow people to experience the appearance of prosperity without the underlying financial stability. And psychologically, this is extremely powerful. Because humans constantly compare themselves to others. Behavioral scientists call this social comparison theory. We measure our success relative to the people around us. If friends upgrade their homes, we feel pressure to upgrade ours. If coworkers drive nicer cars, we feel the urge to match them. But the upper class quietly resists this pressure. They understand something most people overlook. Visibility is not the same as wealth. In fact, many of the things people associate with wealth are actually wealth destroyers. Luxury cars depreciate. High-end fashion loses value instantly. Frequent lifestyle upgrades increase fixed costs. And once those costs rise, financial flexibility disappears. Let's look at a simple example. Imagine 2 professionals. Both earn $120,000 a year. Person A spends aggressively. Luxury car payment, $900 per month. High-end apartment upgrade, $1,200 extra. Designer purchases and lifestyle upgrades. Person B lives slightly below their means. They drive a reliable used car. They invest consistently. They avoid lifestyle inflation. After 10 years, their financial realities look completely different. Person A may appear more successful, but person B quietly owns significant assets. Investments, savings, financial security. This difference rarely shows up on social media, but it completely changes the future. And the upper class understands something that many people learn too late. Wealth grows in silence. Status grows in public. And confusing the two can be financially devastating. But here, where psychology becomes even more interesting. Because the upper class doesn't just manage spending differently. They also manage something far more powerful. Their environment. And this next silent habit may be the most subtle one of all. Because it shapes behavior without people even realizing it.